In light shows to begin with. Doug and our talents were mainly with the painting, but David got across to America we'd painted a car, a Cobra for Tara Brown, who was the heir to the Guinness fortune, and David decided to take it across America, so he drove across the States to San Francisco, and that was before the flower power thing and the San Francisco thing had actually kind of reached these shores. So Dave came back with all this kind of news of what was happening over there with all the acid and everything else. And he was talking about the light shows that were going on at the Fillmore and the Avalon. And there were some light shows happening here, but beginning to happen with Mark Boyle, who was doing light shows at the UFO Club with Pink Floyd. That was in its very early stages. But Dave arranged to get the guy who did the light shows for the Avalon and the Fillmore, he arranged to get him to come over and help us put on a light show at the Roundhouse. And it was we booked it for 2 nights, and it was a really big event. I mean, we approached McCartney, and he did a electronic soundtrack for us. We also approached Radiophonic Workshop, and they did a soundtrack for us. There was always kind of electronic music, so it was ahead of its time in that sense. And for the second show, we went to see impresario in the centre of town at the was it Harley Davidson, which was the biggest agency for musicians at the time. And a guy called Tito Burns who ran the place. And we said we want to name artists for the second show, big name, what have you. And he threw 1 or 2 names forward. He said, "I'll let you have this person, if you take this young lad for £50." We said, "Well, it can't be much good." We were saying to each other, "It can't be much good for £50." But go on then, we'll take him. And it turned out to be Jimi Hendrix. And he brought about maybe an audience. He had then a travelling audience of about 2,000 or 3,000 people. So. The top impresario didn't know what he had on his books, otherwise he would have been charging more than £50 for it,
Yeah.
So that was exciting. The thing is, at that time, because it was happening there and then, I could never really trust my instincts. I'm kind of thinking I'd be watching Hendrix and thinking because he was kind of happening for me in my time there and then, I was thinking is he as good as I think he is? You're nothing to weigh it against, and suddenly as time went on, you thought, yeah, it really was that good,
Yeah.
When Edwards Vaughan split up, and that's mainly through the acid we were taking at the time and the drug scene, it just became too much, and we just all drifted our separate ways. And so I found myself homeless almost, and Paul McCartney got in touch with me and said, "What are you doing at the moment?" I said, "Nothing." He said, "Well, would you like to paint a mural in my house?" I said, "Sure, fine." So I went round there, and I stayed with him for a few months, and I never got much painting done because we'd always be off out to the nightclubs or shopping during the day, or down to the recording studio when they were laying all the tracks down for Sgt. Pepper, so I had most of the tracks being laid and everything. And then when I went, this was at the time when Jane Asher, Paul's then girlfriend, was away on tour in America on some theatrical production. And when she came back, and then Paul didn't want me around anymore, so he said, it just so happened Ringo wanted a mural doing in his house, so Paul said, get in touch with Ringo. So finished up going over to Weybridge where Ringo lived, and stayed with him for a few months painting in this particular case I painted a mural in his games room, and we spent a lot of time together, good times, and it was when I finished doing that I think that's when Mike got in touch, and I'd had a kind of spiritual experience to do with in connection with Mia Barber. And I was related to this to Mike, and Mike just somehow took it like a duck to water. He could see everything that I was getting from it, and we both sort of became devotees very soon after. and that's when eventually Mike involved Pete Townsend, and it just snowballed from there. But we started doing the artwork together, became a partnership with the doing the psychedelic posters and the like. We weren't as, in terms of the psychedelic posters, we were the only people on the scene apart from Apshash and the Coloured Coat, Michael English and Nigel Weymouth, and we weren't as prolific as Apshash because they focused totally on psychedelic posters, whereas Mike and I were more varied. We were doing all kinds of illustration. We were doing book jackets for Jonathan Cape, books for Ed O'Brien and Italo Calvino, various authors, and we were doing record covers for Fats Domino and Andy Brown, various groups. So our kind of more varied illustration we were doing. So the psychedelic posters was just one part of what we were doing, whereas, as I say, for Apshash it was everything. And I think also the style was different. I mean, Apshash, they were very heavily influenced by the pre-Raphaelites, Alphonse Mucha and Audrey Beardsley and the Art Nouveau, all the kind of Floyd kind of stuff that I think they were probably getting out of the drugs at the time and everything, and the influences. And but Mike and I, although we were also at that time sort of still imbibing in acid and things, we were taking it. I think they were taking it for kicks, and we were taking it more as a kind of research almost. You know, where can it take the mind and what have you. So our work was more. It wasn't the pre-Raphaelite thing. It was more cerebral. It was more kind of McGree, Escher orientated. And it wasn't long after that, through the Mayor Barber thing, we met this guy, Dr. Alan Coyne, who came across from the States, and he was one of the first people to take acid with. He was at Harvard with Timothy Leary and Richard Alpern. The three of them were the first ones to experiment with acid in any kind of way. And in between time, Alan Coyne had become a devotee of Mayor Barber's, and he'd sort of been to meet Barber and sort of had all this kind of advice about how, you know, the dangers of hallucinogenic drugs and things. And being a doctor of psychology, he could research it further. And so when he came over, we had organised lectures for him. You know, he had a big influence on us sort of giving up the drugs and everything, and you know, never touched it since. You know. Sometimes it would just be the record company that would ask you, and you never meet the artist. Then on other occasions, it would come through the artist. You know, like Billy Nichols. I don't know if you know Billy's work, but he commissioned me to do an album cover and sort of work to get.
Very rare. It's really hard to find that album as well.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no, it is rare. It's like a lot of the things we did. I mean, Mike and I, we did a poster for Paladé Sports. It was the first gig for British artists of the 60s to take place in Paris, and it was a big event. There was so many artists being flown over, Cat Stevens and Zoot Money, and so many. You know, there were a lot, and we asked to do the poster for it. They wanted a huge poster, you know, twice the normal size, kind of AO size or what have you. And Mike and I thought we'd done a pretty good job on it. But you know, what they used to do in those days, the printers would be asked to print X amount of posters, half of which were meant for sticking up on the billboards in Paris or wherever the venue was to advertise the event. And the other half are held back for the poster shops to sell to all the, you know, the hippies or whoever at that time. And but when it came to the one for the Paladé Sports, the promoters refused to pay the printers, so the printers destroyed the other half of the posters, all the ones that were meant for the poster shops. So I mean, I think I held on to a couple. And I know there's one or two about elsewhere, but you're literally talking about, you could probably count them on both hands, you know, the amount of those posters that exist. So there are, you know, you're right, they are rare, you know, a lot of these things. I mean, I think the only the only thing of mine that remains, actual artwork, of Doug and I, was is McCartney's piano, which is still he was touring it some time ago and taking it to gigs, but now he's had a replica made of it, you know, which doesn't look that good, but I think it's, you know, so the other one could be preserved back at home or what have you.
Yeah.
It'll be in a museum one day.
Yeah, probably, yeah. But yeah, I mean, yeah, they were great times, you know, and working with musicians in that way, yeah.
Cool.
And I like the format of album covers. I mean, I think it's just such a shame that, I mean, we know things have advanced and we know how convenient CDs are and things, but there was something nice about
Feeling
that
and touching.
tactile thing, holding something that large and having the artwork so large, you know, and I'm sure myself and many other people still treasure their album covers, I suppose, you know.